Have you ever wondered why some people seem to move through life feeling everything more deeply than everyone around them? They don't just notice sadness. They carry it. They don't simply hear someone's words. They hear the emotion hidden behind those words. They walk into a room and immediately sense tension before anyone says a single sentence. For an empath, this isn't a special ability they switch on when it's convenient. It's the default setting they've lived with since childhood. And for many years, it doesn't feel like a gift at all. It feels like a burden they never asked for. Most empaths grow up believing there's something fundamentally different about them. They often can't explain why crowded places leave them exhausted, or why another person's gloamings. Anger lingers in their mind long after the argument is over. They absorb emotional information the way a sponge absorbs water. The problem is that no one teaches them how to separate what belongs to them from what belongs to someone else. Psychologically, this creates an invisible conflict. The empath begins to mistake other people's emotional states for personal responsibility. If someone is unhappy, they feel obligated to fix it. If someone is lonely, they feel guilty for walking away. If someone is angry, they search themselves for what they must have done wrong. Over time, they stop asking one essential question: is this emotion even mine? This is where the suffering begins, not because empathy is harmful, but because it is misunderstood. Children who are highly empathetic often become emotional observers. They learn to read facial expressions before they understand language. They notice changes in tone, posture, silence, and atmosphere. In unstable environments, this ability becomes a survival mechanism. They constantly scan for emotional danger, trying to predict conflict before it happens. What starts as protection slowly becomes programming. As adults, they continue scanning. They read between every line. They overanalyze every pause. They notice every slight shift in energy. While other people hear words, the empath hears intention. That level of awareness is incredibly powerful, but it comes with a hidden cost. The nervous system rarely gets permission to rest. The brain stays alert because it has spent years believing emotional vigilance equals safety. Eventually, exhaustion becomes normal. Many people mistake this exhaustion for weakness. It isn't. In reality, the empath has simply been carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry. There's an important psychological principle that explains this. Human beings naturally mirror the emotions of those around them. It's one of the ways we build connection. But empaths experience this process at a much deeper level. Their emotional boundaries are often more permeable. Instead of recognizing another person's pain, they experience it internally, almost as if it belongs to them. Imagine walking through life carrying a backpack. Now imagine that every person you meet quietly places another stone inside it. A disappointed coworker adds one. A struggling friend adds another. Family conflict adds several more. Before long, you're carrying hundreds of stones without realizing you picked them up. Eventually, you collapse under the weight, wondering why life feels so heavy. The weight was never only yours. This misunderstanding creates another dangerous habit. Empaths often become experts at understanding everyone except themselves. They can explain why someone acts the way they do. They can recognize hidden fears, childhood wounds, and emotional defenses in almost anyone. Yet when it comes to their own needs, they're strangely silent. They know how to comfort everyone else. They don't know how to comfort themselves. This is one of the great paradoxes of empathy. The more naturally someone understands others, the easier it becomes to neglect their own emotional world. Philosophically, this raises an important question. Why would someone be born with such overwhelming sensitivity if it causes so much pain? Perhaps the answer isn't that empathy is the punishment. Perhaps ignorance is. A person who feels deeply is forced to confront truths that others can avoid. They see loneliness hidden behind arrogance. They recognize fear beneath anger. They understand that cruelty often grows from unresolved suffering. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it changes how they interpret the world. They begin seeing causes instead of simply reacting to symptoms. That perspective is rare. It also explains why so many empaths feel misunderstood. Society often rewards emotional detachment. It celebrates confidence, speed, and certainty. Empaths operate differently. They pause before judging. They observe before reacting. They seek understanding before conflict. Unfortunately, this patience is sometimes mistaken for weakness, when in reality, it requires enormous emotional discipline. The tragedy is that many empaths spend years trying to become less sensitive. They wish they could stop caring so much. They envy people who seem unaffected by criticism, rejection, or emotional chaos. They believe happiness lies in feeling less. But healing doesn't come from becoming numb. It comes from becoming wise. The goal is never to stop feeling. The goal is to understand what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, and whether it truly belongs to you. The day an empath learns that distinction is the day sensitivity transforms from a burden into strength, because what once felt like a curse was never the problem. The problem was carrying the world without realizing you were allowed to put it down. And that realization changes everything. Once an empath begins to understand that their sensitivity is real, another question usually follows. If they care so deeply and genuinely want the best for people, why do they keep ending up in relationships that leave them emotionally depleted? Why does someone with such a generous heart so often attract people who take far more than they ever give? At first glance, it seems unfair, but psychology suggests something more complicated is happening. People don't simply choose relationships based on logic. They choose what feels familiar. The nervous system is drawn toward patterns it recognizes, even when those patterns are painful. Familiarity can feel safer than health, because it is predictable. This is why many empaths find themselves repeating the same emotional story with different faces. The names change, the circumstances change, but the emotional outcome feels strangely identical. One partner needs constant rescuing. Another demands endless reassurance. Someone else alternates between affection and emotional distance, creating a cycle of hope followed by disappointment. Each time, the empath tells themselves that if they can just love a little harder, understand a little deeper, or remain patient a little longer, everything will eventually improve. That belief comes from a beautiful place, but beautiful intentions don't always produce healthy outcomes. Empaths possess an extraordinary ability to see potential. They rarely judge people solely by their current behavior. Instead, they imagine who that person could become if they healed, if they felt understood, or if someone finally loved them without conditions. There's compassion in that perspective. There's also danger, because potential is not reality. One of the biggest mistakes emotionally intelligent people make is falling in love with someone's future instead of accepting their present. They become emotionally invested in a version of the person that doesn't yet exist. They begin loving possibilities instead of patterns. Patterns tell the truth. Promises often do not. This is where manipulative personalities become especially effective. They quickly recognize someone who is naturally forgiving, patient, and willing to give second chances. They don't necessarily seek kindness because they value it. They seek it because they know how to benefit from it. The empath, meanwhile, often assumes everyone processes emotions the same way they do. They believe honesty creates honesty. They believe loyalty inspires loyalty. They believe kindness naturally produces kindness. Unfortunately, human psychology doesn't work that way. People don't always respond to love by becoming healthier. Sometimes they respond by becoming more comfortable, taking advantage of it. This isn't because love is weak. It's because love without boundaries becomes permission. Think about how often empaths explain away harmful behavior. They're under a lot of stress. They've had a difficult childhood. They didn't really mean it. They're just afraid of getting close. Notice what's happening. The empath becomes the defense attorney for the very person causing the pain. Understanding another person's wounds is valuable, but understanding should never replace accountability. A difficult past may explain someone's behavior, but it does not excuse repeated harm. Those are two very different ideas, and confusing them keeps many empaths trapped for years. Philosophically, suffering often teaches through repetition. Life doesn't always deliver a lesson once and then move on. It presents similar situations until the lesson is understood. That's why so many empaths describe feeling like they keep meeting the same person in different bodies. The lesson isn't about changing everyone else. The lesson is about changing the decision you make when you recognize the pattern. That requires something many empaths struggle with: disappointing people. For someone whose identity has become connected to helping others, saying no feels unnatural. Walking away feels selfish. Setting limits feels cruel. Yet those feelings are often evidence of old conditioning, rather than present reality. Healthy people respect boundaries. Unhealthy people resent them. That distinction alone reveals more about a relationship than months of conversation ever could. Every painful relationship eventually asks the empath the same question. Will you continue abandoning yourself to avoid disappointing someone else? For years, many answer yes. Not because they lack intelligence, not because they lack strength, but because they confuse sacrifice with love. Real love never requires the permanent abandonment of your own well-being. It invites growth from both people. It creates responsibility on both sides. It allows compassion without demanding self-destruction. As these experiences accumulate, something important begins to change. The empath slowly realizes that they cannot heal people who refuse to participate in their own healing. They cannot rescue someone who mistakes rescue for entitlement. They cannot pour endlessly into someone determined to remain empty. This realization is painful because it forces them to release one of the most comforting illusions they have ever believed, that enough love can fix every broken person. It can't. Love can inspire change. Love can support change. Love can encourage change. But only the individual can choose change. Once an empath truly understands this, relationships stop being projects and start becoming partnerships. They stop asking, "How much more can I give?" and begin asking a far more important question. Is this relationship allowing both of us to grow? That single shift transforms everything. It replaces emotional exhaustion with emotional clarity. It replaces endless hope with honest observation. Most importantly, it teaches the empath that protecting their peace is not an act of rejection. It is an act of wisdom, because the people who deserve your heart will never require you to lose yourself in order to keep it. Eventually, there comes a moment that almost every empath encounters, a moment they never expected and certainly never wanted. It isn't marked by a dramatic event that everyone else can see. From the outside, life may appear completely normal. They're still going to work. They're still answering messages. They're still smiling when someone asks how they're doing. But internally, something has reached its limit. The emotional system that has spent years carrying everyone else's burdens simply can no longer continue. This is what many people experience as burnout. But for an empath, it often goes much deeper than exhaustion. It's not just physical fatigue. It's an identity crisis. They begin asking questions they've spent years avoiding. Who am I when I'm not fixing someone? What do I actually want? Why do I feel empty after giving so much? These questions are uncomfortable because they expose a painful truth. Many empaths have spent so much time becoming who others needed them to be that their gelandivation, lost contact with who they are, beneath all the caregiving, understanding, and emotional labor. Psychologists sometimes describe this as the collapse of an old identity. Philosophers have long recognized it as a necessary stage of transformation. Before something authentic can emerge, something false often has to fall apart. The problem is that when you're living through it, it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like failure. You begin questioning your instincts. The compassion that once defined you suddenly feels like a liability. You wonder whether you've been naive all along. Maybe people were right when they said you care too much. Maybe the safest path is simply to stop trusting, stop helping, and stop feeling. Many people mistake this stage for becoming emotionally cold. In reality, it's the mind attempting to protect itself after years of emotional overload. The nervous system isn't saying, "Never care again." It's saying, "I can't survive like this anymore." That distinction matters, because if an empath misunderstands this stage, they often swing from one unhealthy extreme to another. They go from giving everything to giving nothing, from saying yes to everyone to shutting everyone out, from believing everyone deserves another chance to believing no one deserves one. Neither extreme is healing. Healing isn't becoming emotionally unavailable. Healing is becoming emotionally intentional. There's an important psychological principle that explains why this collapse is often unavoidable. Human beings cannot continuously ignore their own emotional needs without consequences. Every unmet need accumulates. Every ignored feeling waits. Every suppressed disappointment remains active beneath the surface. Think of it like a dam holding back water. For years, the empath keeps adding pressure behind that wall. Every sacrifice adds another layer. Every unspoken hurt increases the force. Every time they choose someone else's comfort over their own truth, another crack quietly forms. Eventually, the dam doesn't ask for permission. It breaks, and when it does, the release can feel overwhelming. Tears arrive without warning. Motivation disappears. Relationships that once felt essential suddenly feel unbearable. Even simple conversations become exhausting because the empath no longer has the energy to perform the role they've always played. This is often the loneliest part of the journey, not because people disappear, but because very few understand what's actually happening. Friends may say, "You've changed." Family may wonder why you've become distant. Some people may even accuse you of becoming selfish. What they fail to recognize is that the version of you they miss was surviving, not thriving. The person they call changed may actually be the first authentic version of you they've ever met. Philosophically, this stage resembles what many traditions call walking through the fire. Fire has always symbolized transformation because it destroys what cannot continue while preserving what truly matters. Notice what fire never does. It never asks what you're ready to lose. It simply reveals what can survive the heat. The empath experiences something similar. Illusions begin disappearing. They stop believing that endless sacrifice guarantees love. They stop believing that understanding someone means they must tolerate harmful behavior. They stop believing their worth depends on how useful they are to everyone around them. Those beliefs burn away. What's left is something much stronger than blind kindness. It's wisdom. Wisdom understands that compassion without discernment becomes self-neglect. Wisdom understands that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. Wisdom understands that protecting your peace is not abandoning your values. This is also the stage where many empaths discover solitude in an entirely new way. Earlier in life, being alone often felt like rejection. Now, it begins to feel like restoration. Silence becomes medicine instead of punishment. Time alone becomes a place where the nervous system finally remembers what safety feels like, without constantly monitoring someone else's emotions. That shift changes everything. Because once you experience peace inside your own company, you become far less willing to trade it for chaos disguised as connection. And perhaps that's the hidden purpose of this difficult season. It strips away every false definition you've accepted about yourself. It forces you to separate your identity from your usefulness. It teaches you that your value has never depended on how much pain you can endure for someone else. The collapse, then, was never your ending. It was the ending of a version of yourself that could only survive by disappearing. The strongest people are rarely those who never break. They are the ones who allow what is false to break, so what is true finally has the chance to stand. After an empath has gone through that internal collapse, something subtle begins to change. It doesn't happen overnight, and it rarely arrives with a dramatic announcement. Instead, it begins with small decisions that would have felt impossible just a few years earlier. They stop answering every phone call immediately. They no longer apologize for needing time alone. They begin questioning requests they once accepted automatically. To the outside world, these seem like ordinary changes, but psychologically, they represent one of the most significant transformations an empath can experience. For the first time, they stop measuring their worth by how much of themselves they can give away. This is where many people misunderstand the empath's journey. They assume that becoming stronger means becoming harder. They expect the empath to lose their compassion, to become emotionally distant, or to stop caring altogether. But that isn't what happens. A healed empath doesn't care less. They care with greater wisdom. There's an enormous difference between compassion and responsibility. Compassion allows you to understand another person's suffering. Responsibility convinces you that you must solve it. For years, many empaths confuse those two ideas. Every problem becomes their problem. Every emotional crisis becomes their emergency. Every broken person becomes their mission. Eventually, they discover something life has been trying to teach them all along. You can stand beside someone without carrying them. That realization is incredibly liberating because it removes an invisible burden the empath has been carrying for years. They begin to understand that supporting someone and rescuing someone are not the same thing. Support encourages another person's strength. Rescue often unintentionally encourages dependence. Human beings grow through responsibility. Every time we remove all consequences from someone else's choices, we also remove many of the opportunities that would have encouraged their growth. That doesn't make boundaries cruel. It makes them deeply respectful. Think about the healthiest teachers you've ever had. They didn't complete your work for you. They challenged you to develop your own abilities. In the same way, emotionally healthy relationships allow people to solve their own problems, while offering encouragement along the way. Empaths slowly begin embracing this principle. Instead of asking, "How can I fix this person?" they begin asking, "What belongs to me, and what belongs to them?" That single question becomes one of the most powerful filters they will ever develop. If someone refuses accountability, that belongs to them. If someone repeatedly violates trust, that belongs to them. If someone becomes angry because healthy boundaries limit their control, that belongs to them. The empath finally stops collecting responsibilities that were never theirs to carry. At first, this shift feels uncomfortable. In fact, many empaths experience intense guilt when they begin setting boundaries. They worry they're becoming selfish. They fear disappointing people. Some even feel anxious simply by saying the word no. But guilt is not always evidence that you're doing something wrong. Sometimes guilt is simply the emotional withdrawal symptom of abandoning an unhealthy pattern. If you've spent years believing your value depends on constant availability, then choosing yourself will naturally feel unfamiliar. The nervous system interprets unfamiliarity as danger, even when the change is healthy. This is why growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels empowering. One of the greatest philosophical misunderstandings about kindness is the belief that kindness requires unlimited access. It doesn't. Genuine kindness includes honesty. It includes self-respect. It includes recognizing that your emotional energy is finite. Imagine trying to light an entire city with a candle that is never allowed to protect its own flame. Eventually, the flame disappears. Then no one receives any light. The empath begins realizing that preserving their own emotional well-being isn't selfish. It's what allows their compassion to remain genuine, rather than becoming exhausted. Resentment disguised as generosity. Another fascinating shift begins to occur. The empath becomes less interested in convincing people to understand them. Earlier in life, they desperately wanted everyone to see their intentions. They explained themselves repeatedly. They defended every decision. They hoped that if people truly understood their heart, conflict would disappear. But maturity teaches a different lesson. Not everyone is committed to understanding you. Some people are committed to misunderstanding you because it protects the story they want to believe. Recognizing this saves enormous amounts of emotional energy. The empath stops trying to win approval from people who have already decided not to offer it. Instead, they invest their energy where mutual respect already exists. This doesn't mean becoming cynical. It means becoming discerning. Discernment is one of the defining qualities of emotional wisdom. It allows compassion without naivete. It allows forgiveness without surrendering boundaries. It allows love without abandoning self-respect. Perhaps the most remarkable change is that peace gradually becomes more attractive than validation. The empath no longer needs to be the hero in everyone's story. They no longer need to prove how loyal they are by enduring mistreatment. They no longer mistake endless tolerance for unconditional love. Instead, they begin protecting something they once gave away too easily, their inner stability. Ironically, this is also the moment healthier people begin entering their lives. Why? Because boundaries don't just keep unhealthy people at a distance. They also create space for emotionally mature people who appreciate mutual respect instead of endless sacrifice. The empath discovers that the relationships worth keeping never require constant self-abandonment. They thrive because both people contribute, both people grow, and both people accept responsibility for their own emotional lives. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The moment you stop trying to save everyone else is often the exact moment you finally save yourself. By the time an empath reaches this point in their journey, something extraordinary has happened. Not extraordinary because the world has